I think that's when it occurred to me is this is legitimately some people's all-time favorite band, and I can never phone in a show because people work hard for their money. And if they're gonna lay down their money, especially for something that they love so much, I don't want to let them down.
Welcome to Overeducated and Underemployed. Hope you dig the new theme song. Sloan Brothers knocked it out of the park. I love it. I hope y'all do too. Make sure to check out Sloan Brothers' new record, Love and Other Diagnosis. It's available on all streaming platforms, but also check out the Bandcamp. Get the vinyl. This week we got Bryan Howard from Cracker. He's a voice actor. Does a bunch of amazing. Played in a bunch of amazing bands all over Athens, Georgia, and up in Alexandria, Virginia, where he grew up. But we had a great talk. I really enjoyed talking to him. I feel like most of the people I've had on here, there's going to be a follow-up one day. Whatever we didn't get to, we'll get to next time. To celebrate the 30th anniversary of their album, The Golden Age. Cracker's doing the camping in March, so check that out. We've got links to Bryan's website and everything in the description. Thanks for tuning in. Hit that subscribe button. We're on Overeducated and Underemployed. I'm here with Bryan Howard. He's a musician, a voice actor. You're the bass player for Cracker for over a decade now.
Yep.
And I want to learn way more, so that's why we're here. I'm going to ask you the same question I ask everybody to start with, and that's what's the first song that you remember loving as a kid?
The first song I remember loving as a kid, it was probably something like, I loved the Coward of the County, I think is probably the first one I really remember. Because I think the first two records I bought were Urban Chipmunk and Kenny Rogers' Greatest Hits.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
And about how old were you, do you know?
Oh, probably 7, 8, something like that.
Okay. And were you really into music in general already, or were you?
I was a fan of music, but it wasn't what it has become. It wasn't my world or anything.
Were you like banging on pots and pans or playing? Were you interested in playing it, or were you just listening to it?
Not at that point, really. I guess I started playing when I was in the 4th grade. I joined a fife and drum corps.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, so
I'm a big Oath Turner fan, so like I love that stuff. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then when my mom and my stepfather had reconnected, I remember watching them, and she was showing him how to play a scale on the piano. And then I started messing around with the piano after that because it started to make sense.
Gotcha. Were you interested in going to see live music as a kid?
Once Purple Rain came out. So yeah, that was my first concert was Prince.
Wow.
Yeah, the Purple Rain tour.
That's wild.
It was that was the turning point. That was the thing that did it.
Yeah.
It was like, dude came up from an elevator from under the stage and had thousands of people in the palm of his hand. He died on my birthday.
Oh man.
Worst birthday ever. Wow. And I hate the fact that some of the stuff has come out because clearly he didn't want it out.
Yeah.
But I also love the fact that some of the stuff has come out. So that I think the concert, it was like a night of like maybe 3 or 4 shows. So one of the shows is actually on YouTube now. I saw it at the Capitol Center.
Wow.
You ever seen Heavy Metal Parking Lot?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That was where I saw my first concert. I actually think some of those people went to school with me. But
that's incredible. How were you there? Like, what got you? Did your parents take you? Were you?
I went with my brother and his girlfriend at the time. She's the one that stayed in line for hours and hours and got the tickets for us. And yeah, that was my very first concert. And yeah, March of '84, I think.
So how have you ever been satisfied ever since? I feel like it's all downhill from there.
I mean, it was a great place to start, but that was what really started
Yeah.
the whole thing.
And what was the first instrument that you wanted? Was it guitar? Because he's such an amazing guitar player.
The first thing I took lessons on was saxophone.
Okay.
Yeah, in school. So I played saxophone for several years, and then I started messing around with guitar. And
Were you playing sax like in rock music, or were you okay?
School stuff, very beginner.
Yeah,
and
yeah.
symphonic band stuff like that.
Yeah, and I assumed that.
Tuba, I think, my senior year of high school.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
In fact, funny thing.
You're a big guy, so they probably just stuck. Yeah.
I don't think my mom liked that.
I mean, I feel like if I had been in band, they would have put me in a tuba immediately.
What's wild was I was second or third chair, and first chair was this guy, Michael Nickens, who's known as Doc Nix. And he has a video that you've probably seen, his pep band playing Rage Against the Machine. It's pretty old at this point, but we were on the same high school band.
Nice. So you went and saw Prince.
Yeah.
You started playing saxophone. But then you got into guitar. What was the kind of turning point from saxophone into wanting to play rock and roll music?
When I was in fife and drum corps, that's when I got in my first band. So Andrew McCain, who's one of the guys who moved to Georgia with me, we would have band practices over at his house after. You'll hear me say the Guard, because that's what the fife and drum corps was called, the Mount Vernon Guard. So we would have rehearsals over at his place after Guard performances. And on the weekends, we actually practiced a good bit. And that was when I started messing around with guitar. At the time, in that band, I started off as the drummer.
Okay.
And my friend Chris Anderson, who was the bass player at the time, decided he wanted to play drums. And I was trying to give him all these great arguments and reasons why he should stick with bass. And he essentially said, well, if it's so great, why don't you do it? And I was like, got a point as well. So that's how that started. But my brother-in-law is a fantastic bass player.
And you grew up in Alexandria?
Correct.
Okay. Just outside of DC, you're going to, were you going to other shows, or was that just kind of like a once in a while thing?
We started playing shows at a Unitarian church. They had their coffee house. I think it was like one Friday out of the month. So that was how we really started playing out. And then we started getting a little more serious about it. And it was funny. We booked a show at this Mexican restaurant. I think it was called Tio Pedro. And they booked us, and our crowd was underage. And there was a good bit of drinking. So it was an issue. So like it happened once. We were supposed to, almost like a residency kind of thing. And being in the DC area, we looked, a few weeks later, there was a band playing there called Fugazi, which apparently was a mariachi band. But you can imagine being in the DC area, lying around the block, and then after doors, people freaking out and getting pretty upset that it wasn't Fugazi.
Yeah.
So we had the one night at Tio Pedro's.
Remind me the name of so you started a band with a few of your friends, and y'all moved here.
The band I moved to Georgia with, it's called Slack Daddy.
Slack Daddy, that's right. I knew I couldn't, it was just on the tip of my tongue, sorry. And that was in
1996.
96, okay. So I don't want to skip too much here. Is there, like, what's going on between this Mexican restaurant gig and stuff, the beginning, and moving to Athens? Tell me that story.
Everyone in the band, after high school, we went our separate ways, but we would still get together over the summers. And I went to school with a guy named Cecil Conley, James Madison University, and he put on a festival called Cecil Fest to celebrate his birthday, and he booked us. So we went, and a friend of ours, Caroline Prue, came and she filmed it. And we watched it, and it was a pretty good performance. And that's what encouraged us to maybe we should try this for real. So we decided that I think it was after Andrew graduated, we were going to move to Georgia. And that's what we did. We were all in different places when we signed the lease. By fax back then. Because he went to Amherst, so he was in Massachusetts. The drummer, Ian Worden, he was in Guam, and I was in Harrisonburg, Virginia. And then we made this decision based on the love of music and that Cecil Fest performance.
And that was basically like a one-off reuniting kind of thing that your friend got you to do. So
it was, we played.
You still played together some throughout after high school. Okay.
But it was fun to, we played as much as we could, but we didn't really.
It sounds like that was geographically challenging, to say the least.
Yeah, we would play at Harrisonburg and other places during the summer, but we didn't do a whole lot of real traveling until we moved to Georgia.
Gotcha. What was it about Georgia that
Kevin Kenney? That was what it was for me. When I went to JMU, one of my best friends, Andrew Stitt, was my roommate. And another musician, Amy Dominguez, who's still active in the DC area. She played with, I randomly saw her in Athens one day. She was playing cello with Mary Timoney. But I'm not sure what, I know she still plays. I think she's very involved in classical music and playing the cello da gamba or something. She does neat stuff from what I see.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
She brought over a copy of McDougal Blues, and my roommate and I listened to it. It was probably about 3 times in a row. Just absolutely loved this record. And after the whole Cecil Fest thing, and we were trying to decide where to go, he kept saying, Andy Stitt that is, was like, you should go to Athens, Georgia. And he'd play the Athens, Georgia Inside Out soundtrack all the time to kind of encourage it. And then when I found out that Kevin Kenney lived in Athens, I was like, oh, let's go check it out.
So did you visit first? Repeatedly or?
No, we came down once.
You came down once.
And we went to see, we saw Harvey Milk at the Atomic.
Nice.
And we saw a band called Funk-O-Matic at the 40 Watt Club. And I think we had lunch. It was like $5, going in on the beer. So we're like, yeah, this will work. We actually didn't move into Athens proper. We lived in Comer.
Okay.
For a year and a half, something like that.
But you found it affordable. You found it to have the scene that you were looking for and people that you admired and respected.
Oh yeah.
Was anybody arguing for any other city? Was there debate about it, or was it?
Really? I think we had talked about maybe 2 or 3 cities. Asheville, I think, was something that was considered, but I think Athens was let's go and check it out and see what that's.
What was it like? What was this entering a scene like that's pretty well established already?
You know what? One of the reasons we chose Athens was it was 1996. The Olympics were going on. So we figured all the clubs would be packed. Instant fame, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
international audience coming to you.
Yeah, exactly. So
it's 1996,
that was
the Olympics.
Another big reason why it was Athens. We didn't take into account how difficult it was going to be to rent places then. That's why we wound up in Comer.
Interesting. Yeah. Because they had a lot of the events here in this.
I think they had like rhythmic gymnastics. They had, I think, soccer.
Okay.
Or at least women's soccer, because we were playing at a place called Wishbones when was it the women's team won. It was at Brandy Chastain and whipped off the top. A huge roar, and it was right as we finished the song. We're all like, there's no way people here to make that kind of sound for us. But yeah, so
I bet it felt good for a minute though.
But it was rhythmic gymnastics. I think maybe like kayaking or something weird. There were a few events here in town.
Yeah, yeah. So after the kind of the Olympics blows over, you're able to move into Athens proper. But what you were having the realization of the Olympics when I asked you this the first time. But what was it like to move to a city as a band that already had such an established scene? I mean, everybody had these. Was it welcoming? What did you find it hard to break in?
No, weird story how we got our very first show. Again, I was in the fife and drum corps with Andrew, and we went to Ireland 4 times to perform the St. Patrick's Day parade, but we travel around. We both worked at a steak delivery place called Stakeout. This is weird. Our manager was a guy we called Irish Dave because he was from Ireland. And we were talking about it. And we're like, so where in Ireland are you from? He's like, oh, Galway. I was like, oh, yeah, I've been to Galway. He's like, oh, really? I was like, yeah. Remember the statue, the Galway hooker? I was like, and we stayed at a hotel called Flannery's. And he's like, oh, I know Flannery's. I was like, you don't know Frankie Flannery, do you? And he's like, holy crap, Frankie Flannery. He's like, if you're Frankie Flannery, then I have to help you get a gig. And he got us a gig at Flanagan's. And that was our very first show in Athens. It was a weird coincidence that like the one guy in Ireland I happened to know by name was also known by this dude.
That's stuff just happens, man. Yeah. Like the world is a weird place.
It's I don't know, telling this stuff is making me realize it's
yeah, that's pretty serendipitous. Yeah. So your first gigs at Flanagan's. And is this during the Olympics or still?
I think that no.
It had. Okay. What other bands were you playing with at the time? What was the scene like?
When we moved to town, we pretty much only played with Slack Daddy.
Okay.
I didn't start playing out really with other bands until it was apparent that Slack Daddy was going different ways and different directions.
What other bands was Slack Daddy playing with though? On the bills and stuff like that. Like who was in the scene at the time?
There was a band called Space Voyage of Him that we played with.
Nice.
Oh, there were just so many. I'm trying to think of somebody we played with a lot. It was who else? We got around.
Yeah. You know? But I'm just curious.
We had Carl Lindbergh used to put on a festival called the Shanti Festival.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you're familiar with it.
I've heard of it, yeah.
So one year, when we moved, when we were living out in the country in Comer, we're like, hey, you can do the festival out here. And he came out to check it out. He's like, oh, it's cool and all, but I think it's just a little too far out of town, so we're probably going to pass. And I think 2 weeks, a week or so before the show, we saw flyers for it, and they were directions to our place. Wow. So I guess they changed their mind. So a lot of folks that played in that scene, we didn't limit it to anyone. Anyone that was willing to play with us, we would Southern Bitch. There's just a lot of bands.
Yeah, there's probly hundreds.
Oh yeah. Just trying to recall the names is the thing that's throwing me.
Yeah, no, and that's fine. We don't have to dwell on that. They can go watch documentaries and stuff. I guess I was getting more curious if there was anybody of note that you remembered more, not just, but yeah, it sounds like the scene was super welcoming to y'all when you got here. It wasn't like they were gatekeeping or to outsiders or anything like that. And I've never experienced anything like that here either. I'm just curious. I feel like that's a dynamic that there's individual musicians that move here a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I don't hear about a whole band moving here very often.
Yeah, it was, for the most part, it was very welcoming. And it just, once we started getting into the scene and attending more shows, then it became easier to book shows.
Yeah. What were what were some of the venues that you remember that maybe aren't around anymore that you thought were really important to the scene back then?
When I moved, definitely the Atomic. And then Tasty World came around not too long after we moved to town. That's gone. It's not that they had a ton of shows at the Engine Room, but I remember the Engine Room being really important to the Athens music scene. I'm trying to think of where else. We started doing an open mic night when there was the Athens Brewing Company. Because there wasn't, I was surprised there wasn't an open mic night when we came here, but
Oh, interesting.
but that place was crazy because they let us run it. So here we are in this brewery, and there was no one really taking money down there, and we had access to all the home brews. So it could get pretty rowdy at times.
Yeah, yeah. At what point did you start playing with other bands, or I guess what happened to Slack Daddy? What's the story there?
It's just one of those things, just time. Andrew got married, and he moved. It was a little. He didn't move far from town. He just moved to was it Jefferson? But it was far enough that it made it a little difficult to get together regularly, and just life. There was no animosity or anything like that. And I had already started doing some stuff with Kevin Kenney.
Gotcha. And how did you meet Kevin? Because it sounds like that was like a goal of yours when you moved here.
Oh, yeah. It took 2 years to actually see him play
Mhm.
after moving here. But I was working at the 40 Watt, and
Okay.
Cheap Trick was playing. And
At
I
the
was
40
working,
Watt?
yeah. And I was working at the back door, and it was like, oh, and people were like, oh, that's Robin Zander. Oh, Bunny Carlos was. I was like, is that Kevin Kenney? They're like, oh yeah, he's here all the time. So they used to tell us back then, always carry a cassette of your stuff because you never know who you're going to run into, and that's what I did. So I gave Kevin a cassette of Slack Daddy stuff, and I was like, if you ever need a bass player, let me know. And then I think a year later, his manager, Scott Munn, came and found me at the 40 Watt and was like, Kevin wants you to play on Peacemaker. I think maybe it was just Peacemaker at this show. So I learned it and showed up. And then I think it was like maybe Greg Hester and someone else. And we're hanging out backstage. And Kevin's like, oh, let's just all go out together. Kevin's the master of fake it till you make it. So we never played Peacemaker. I made it through that show, and I remember thinking to myself, oh my God, I guess I whiffed that one. I'll never hear from him again. And then maybe a few months after that, Scott came back down and was like, Kevin wants to know if you can go out and do a few shows. Tim's not able to do it. It was for the Broken Hearts and Auto Parts tour.
Okay.
And then I went out and did that.
So when your other band breaks up, you're just ready to go do whatever with whoever at that point. You've kind of, and at that point did that become a more regular thing with Kevin? Yeah. You started touring with them for how many years?
About 8 years.
Yeah, okay. And that I'm sure that there wasn't a lot of room for other bands in that time.
No, it was. I played with some other folks in town. Craig Liskey, any project
I love Craig,
he
man.
would ask me to do, he was the guy.
Craig was like a really good friend of mine. I fucking love that guy.
Yeah, one of my favorites, and he was the one that kind of impressed upon me that it's just music. No one's going to die from bad notes, and that kind of, when you start thinking about it that way, you less fearful of wanting everything to be perfect, and people just want it to be good. I don't think anyone's necessarily worried about perfection. They just want a good show.
He also just had this energy about him that I feel like really helped people feel like they could do anything.
Yeah. And he was great at putting people together.
Yeah.
Oh, you should meet so-and-so.
For sure.
So yeah, there were a lot of playing with other bands. This band called Jackpot City that I wound up playing a good number of shows with.
Did you play with Thundercrack?
I did not.
Okay, I'm just curious if
I did a few shows with Mother Jackson.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, whoever was asking, I was willing to give it a shot. And then I did. So very first show I go out on with Kevin, when we went out on that run, he was asking me who some of my favorite bass players were. I was like, oh, James Jamerson, Carol Kay, Brian Ritchie. And he's like, wait. You mean Brian Ritchie from the Violent Femmes? I was like, yeah, I just love what he does. He's one of my best friends from high school. I was like, no way. So eventually Kevin put me in touch with Brian. And I was like, you should really invite him out to a show. I did. So I was playing with Sarah Lee Guthrie and her husband, Johnny Iron, at the time. And he came and he showed up and he stood at the side of the stage the whole time. I was like, oh, it was just terrifying. And afterwards he said, yeah, I could hear my influence. So he's been a good friend. And
That's hilarious.
he would, after that show, we talked for a while. And he's like, we're playing in Charlotte on October 29th. You want to come out and play bass on Gone Daddy Gone so I can do the xylophone stuff? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. And then I kept getting emails. I want you to play on this tune as well and on this tune. So I was wound up doing almost like half the show with him. And then I show up at sound check and he's like, okay, we're going to do a Coltrane tune. Oh my God, what have I gotten myself into? Plus it's a Halloween show. So the Violent Femmes are one of my favorite bands, but the first time I'm on stage, everyone in the audience is dressed like demons and ghouls and stuff. So it was quite an experience. But
They
I did
played with our
handful of shows
orchestra
them.
a couple of years ago.
Oh,
And
it was fantastic. We
was
just
so
went to
cool.
see them in
Yeah.
Atlanta a few months ago.
Oh, nice.
We did the
So-
orchestra show.
Your list of favorite bass players is just reconfirming this theory that I've got. And I'm going to derail the
John
conversation.
Paul Jones, I know I mentioned.
Yeah, there's another one though. Why are so many bass players have two first names?
That's a good question.
There's even Kim Gordon, John
Yeah.
Paul Jones, Brian Howard. There's so many bass players that have two first names, and I don't understand this phenomenon, and I can't figure it out. What's going on? It's a real thing though. I'm convinced.
Beyond something.
Anyway, so you are going out with them at times. You're playing with a bunch of different people. At what point have you ever been a songwriter, or is that something that you've ever been interested in?
Well, I started a band called The Heap.
Oh
and,
yeah.
I would write songs for that, but we really wrote those songs together. I might bring in an idea, but the horns, they'd do their thing where they would huddle and then come up with these magical lines and stuff like that. But yeah, I dabble.
No, in the studio or with when you're in a band, you typically write a lot of your own parts, or does it just depends on who you're working with? Or yeah,
I'd say like 95% of the time it's what I come up with. Generally, if somebody asks for me, it's because they want
you're compositional.
the way
Yeah,
that I do things.
Yeah. That's awesome. So at what point were you able to start making a full-time living doing music? Because I'm sure that when you first moved here, you guys probably had to get like part-time jobs at least.
Oh yeah, for sure. And even when I was out with Kevin, I'm very blessed to have a great partner. My wife is fantastic. So she carried the burden for a while, and then she was doing carpentry, and then the housing bubble burst, and she said she wanted a job that was recession proof. So she said she was going to go to nursing school. So when she went to nursing school, then it was time for me to get a full-time job. So I was like, I've done all this stuff. It was cool. I got farther than a lot of people do that try this. So she's done this for me. It's only fair that I hold up my end and take care of things while she's in school. And she was still working, contributing, but
Of course, yeah.
and
It's America. There's no single income households here.
so but I would still do shows here in town, but there wasn't a lot of touring or anything during that point. And then when she graduated, shortly after she graduated, I got a call. It had to have been. So it was right around the time she graduated. It was in July of 2012, July 2nd. I got an email from Valina asking if I could fill in for Sal, for Cracker, for some shows on the Bare Naked Ladies last Summer on Earth tour. It was the Bare Naked Ladies, Blues Traveler, Big Head Todd and Monsters, and Cracker.
And that was in like 2014?
2012.
2012, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so you start filling in
I
periodically
did 2 weeks on that
before he
tour,
left.
but I was working at the software place. So I did that, and then...
But was your software job, was it always a placeholder in your head, or was it, okay, this is what I do now?
No, it was what I intended to do as a career. And then things changed there radically. And it was not the place I wanted to be anymore. And by that time, I had started doing more stuff with Crackers. Yep, I came in for those 2 weeks when Sal wasn't able to be out for medical reasons. And then I went back to the software gig. And then in 2014 was when I was asked if I would do the job full time.
Yeah.
I was still working at the software place for the first 2 or 3 years I was in Cracker.
Was that a hard decision? Was that something like to?
No, it was great because I was double dipping because I was working while I'm on the road in the van.
No, I just mean, was it a hard decision to join a band full? Because it's one thing to be like, yeah, I'll go out on the road for 2 weeks. And
their touring schedule wasn't anything like months at a time, so it was something that was completely feasible.
It was manageable, and it was okay. But it was still it's still a bigger commitment than what you had previously. What was that? There was no. You were just all in immediately, or
that's what I wanted to do. So.
Hell yeah!
And the thing that's funny is when I got that initial email from Valina, I started listening to the tunes. I was like, oh yeah, I know that song. I was like, yeah, I know that one too. Oh yeah, I know that song and I actually really like it. So I was like, yeah, why not?
And bass is such a prominent part on so many of those songs too. It's the driving force of the melody. It's everything. Yeah. It's sometimes you don't even care if there is guitar on a Cracker.
There's some wild bass lines. Davey Farragut. They've had fantastic bass players.
Yeah.
So it's big shoes to fill, in my opinion. So that was. In fact, I was just thinking about it earlier. There was a time where we were in London. You got to keep in mind, I'm still working at the software place, and at this point, I was digitizing aerial photos for people's maps. It was a GIS thing. I worked with rural power companies, rural co-ops. So I'm putting these people's maps together backstage in London and trying to do this install. I'm like, hey, you all, I'm going to have to take a break for a few hours. I got to go do a show, but then I'll be back and doing that and then coming back, going to the hotel and getting back on.
And the time difference probably worked in your favor that night.
At times, yeah. And then once or twice I would get a message from my immediate supervisor, and I think really they were just...
Why aren't you at your desk?
They were just checking to see that I was actually working. So the fact that I was allowed me to keep that until that place took the turn and I needed to get out.
Yeah.
And then when I got out, I was able to do, not stress about it, and I still had the band.
And I'm just gonna take a guess that it's like
voiceover.
Profits over people, and that's usually the story with a lot of at its core.
A handful of folks were like that, but they were the folks that were making decisions.
Right. Exactly. And that's what I mean with the company.
It was a fantastic company. It was a blessing when I started working there. Honestly, it was a blessing that I left because that's when I started the voiceover career.
And how did you start with that? I mean,
because it was something I'd always.
You definitely, and I've been told I have a radio. Oh no, it was Radio Face. They told me I had, but
I've heard that a few times. I worked as a board operator when we first moved to Georgia. That was one of my other jobs aside from the delivering steaks.
Will you tell the kids what a board operator was?
So back in the day, we would get these shows that would come in, we would get a feed, and the board operator, my job was to take what we called carts and play PSAs or commercials at the proper time, pot down the feed from the broadcast and bring up the local news and do that. So I was just controlling the flow of the show.
Basically like live producing
Eh,
in a way, yeah.
yeah, like a live engineering.
But
Yeah.
so you'd been in that world already. You've probably been told you have one of those like rich voices that is like soothing, easy to listen to, that kind of thing.
Well, initially, I was told that, hey, we might get you your own show or whatever. I knew I was losing that job when they brought in the computer system. You may want to pay attention to this. I was like, oh, I know what that means. Does not mean you need to pay attention. It means that
Yeah.
see ya. But it was fine. I wasn't a huge fan of radio. I thought it would be more about music instead. It was really more about sales. At least the radio that I worked in. It's a business.
So
But it was something I always wanted to do. And shortly before I left the software company, I reconnected with an old friend from JMU, Shannon Torrance, who was working as a voice actor. And I found out about that, and we had a talk. And she's like, I need you to do these things. You got to take some kind of class, some kind of course, and you have to have a demo made professionally. She's like, once you've done that, get back in touch with me. And I did that. And the next day, she sent it out to some of her agents, and I got an agent the day after I got my demo. So it was very lucky. And the classes I took, I'll never forget this, because
I was about to ask.
I still know the dates. I took them at a place called Your Act, which seemed sketchy, and now I know it was sketchy. I mean, there were people in the class that really couldn't read, and she's, oh, you're wonderful, you're great, and do this. And I was like, yeah.
Like illiterate couldn't read?
Oh, let's say not the most proficient.
Okay.
But there were one or two people that were actually really pretty good. But it was one of those things where they're like, hey, it's a 3-week course, and then there are 3 levels of the course. And if you do all 3 levels, then we put you in front of these agents or whatever.
Gotcha.
I learned after actually getting into voiceover that that's a big red flag, because who knows that you're going to be ready to do your demo after that. But regardless, I was doing those shows. It was April 7th, 14th, and 21st. And I know these dates because I think it was either the 7th or the 4th was when Prince was going to do his one show at the Fox. I was like, I'm driving down to this voiceover class. I was like, I think I know enough people. I could probably get into that show if I want. I'm already down here. I was like, nope, not going to do it. I'm just going to go and do this class like I said I was, because he loves to tour. He loves playing. He'll be back. And then the 21st, which was my last class, was the day he died. And also my birthday was the day he died. Worst birthday ever. Man. Yeah, it was a drag, because I was working at the software company, and I was doing an on-site install in somewhere in Wisconsin near Appleton, because we flew from Appleton to Detroit at 5 a.m, Detroit to Atlanta. Then we drove from Atlanta to Athens. Then I turned around and drove back to Atlanta to do the voice acting class, to drive back, all on the day that, like, my musical hero. That was a rough day.
And it was a particularly rough day for you, I think, but it was for a lot of people too. Yeah. I think America was heartbroken that day, or at least the people that gave a shit about interesting things.
That was a tough one.
Yeah, man. What's striking to me is the parallel that Prince had at the beginning of he's your first show and your inspiration to start playing music. And then he's also weirdly part of the beginning of your voice acting career too. There's this very impactful event the other direction, but involving Prince the day you finish those classes. Yeah. So Has
That's
that
why I
ever
remember
occurred?
the dates.
But has that ever occurred?
I had never thought of it that way, but I can.
That's all I heard.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of.
Is like Prince is like always been this like constant, but also like on important momentous occasions in your life too. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So where does it go from taking this class, you get your agent? I don't want to just gloss over Prince's death.
It's all right.
Yeah.
We've moved.
America has still. I think people have talked about it. You finish these classes, you get an agent immediately. Did it continue to be that easy, or?
Oh no, because I don't get a ton of work through the agents because you have to guarantee that you're going to be in your studio at certain dates if you get the job, and I don't want to put myself in a position where if I was actually chosen that I'm actually on the road in a hotel where it sounds completely different than the audition I sent in.
I see.
I work with a few pay-to-play, what they call them, sites. And from that, I was able to cultivate a good number of clients that became steady clients.
What are some of the kinds of work that you've done that you have been able to consistently do with voice acting?
I do a lot of like internal explainer videos. I've done hundreds of videos for Walmart explaining everything from like how to set up the produce to how to deal with the wiring money, stuff like that. And,
it's occurring to me that I think I've seen videos with your voice, like corporate. So you're talking like corporate training videos a lot of the time, things like that.
They do stuff for the VA. Helping train the people that are going to be working with
commercials at all.
I have a handful of commercials. I had one national commercial in 2020 for the census.
Gotcha.
So that one you are likely to have heard.
Yeah, for sure. I'm
not stuff on iHeartRadio.
It's more that I'm hearing your voice now and thinking, wait a second. So that's been a consistent line of work for you as well.
A hunting show.
A hunting show, huh?
And I'm not a big. I've never been hunting in my life, and I was like, as long as they're not hunting big game, I could do this. But that was one where it's like, yeah, we're going after a big whitetail named Old Red. Quick Hunts.
Nice.
Quick Hunts was the name.
You don't want to say that too quickly.
So yeah.
Don't say Quick Hunts too quickly.
Exactly.
It's
been a wide range of stuff for the voiceover.
And that's helped you be able to stay doing these things that you're passionate about instead of having to go get back into the grind.
Yep. And some of the jobs I do, I am able to set up my little pillow fort, or I've got a little mobile studio I take around and record commercials.
What kind of equipment do you need for something like that?
I travel with a Sennheiser 416 microphone. I've used a few different interfaces. I use a Volt right now currently because it's just easy, and just running that into. I use Reaper is my DAW. I'm a big fan of Reaper.
Gotcha.
And I can just crank them out, send them out through Weed Transfer.
That's amazing. In some ways, it reminds me of this because a lot of the time I do these in my home with a soundboard and everything, better mics and stuff. But I don't travel with that. But I can set up and do this anywhere. I did one in the foundry, in the bar of the foundry the other week. Nice. So there was a bit of background noise, but it worked out. How much of that is just improvised over the years that you've kind of like, I have a problem, I've got to solve it, and then you can now work in those conditions.
It's a steady. I feel like I learned something new about traveling and touring and doing the voiceover on the road each year, and I learn more and more about it. You got to constantly keep learning.
Yeah.
So I've been things improving. A lot of it's like just little things, but it's refining.
Yeah, for sure. What are some of the ways, and I'm going to just back up and shift a little bit here. What are some of the ways that you've noticed that Athens has really changed since you moved here 19 years ago, or
Well,
29 years ago. Oh, sorry, time is a bitch.
Yeah, it's just like anything. There are less mom and pop shops downtown than there used to be. I think the spirit is still pretty much the same,
I think that's true.
but some of the geography and obviously the people have changed. But Athens is still a great place to be as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah, I think it's been shielded from a lot of the. You've seen there's definitely been some gentrification here and corporations moving in and just like everywhere else. But I do think that it has been somewhat shielded from a lot of the shit that has really screwed up a lot of the other cities in America.
There's still a real, I think, a true love of music and the arts here in town.
Yeah, it's a real priority in a way that I don't see in other cities that claim they love the arts and do support the arts in some ways, but it's not their passion.
Yeah, Patton Oswalt has a famous bit about being in Athens and the way things work. In the grand scheme, a lot of it's true. I think it's pretty supportive. So yeah, it's changed, but a lot of it's still, in a way, still the same.
Yeah, I think that's, as someone who's been visiting here for 20 years pretty consistently and just getting these like snapshots, I think it's hard to see your kid grow when you're with them every day. You know what I mean? But when you leave and you come back and you see the differences, I've seen the physical changes, but you're right. The spirit of this place has maintained, I think, really consistently.
And I can do everything and get everything done I need to here. So I don't need to be in New York or LA, or though there might be more opportunities if I was in one of those towns, but I'd still get plenty of opportunity. We started doing a lot of remote recording during the lockdown and COVID times.
How does recording for voice acting compare to recording for music? What are some of the big differences for you when you have to do those remotely?
Oh, those, it's really pretty similar. It's just the same kind of things that you're keeping in mind. I always get a kick out of the scripts I get where I'm the husband, but I only read my lines and I have no idea how the other actor is delivering theirs.
You don't even hear.
So I love the idea of, well, what if they deliver it this way? Then I have to do it like this. So I usually do an ABC, 3 takes that give them variety. But remote recording has worked out very well for me. And musically, it's worked out extremely well. I have a woman I like to collaborate with in San Francisco, and it's great to be able to just send stuff and back and forth with ease.
Yeah, and I hear mixed feelings about remote recording, right? Because some people really lean into, especially when it breaks down geographical barriers and things like that. But have you ever run into the issue? A common issue that I've heard that people have had with it is when it's a more collaborative process recording, one member might go too far down a rabbit hole without feedback, and then whereas in a studio you might get, oh no, that's not quite what we're trying to do here, and then some redirection. And I'm thinking of some specific stories that I've heard. I'm not gonna call anybody out, but I've just heard, oh, we were recording this song and I got this part, and then I recorded it and I did 10 takes and they ended up all not being what they wanted, and I didn't get any feedback until I had already done all 10 of the takes or whatever. And
I can honestly tell you, I have never dealt with that.
That's really cool.
I think I'm blessed to have a really great network of musicians that I get to work with, that I'm lucky enough to work with. And I am able to communicate an idea to them enough that, and also, I was saying, if I'm calling on them, I want that thing that they do.
Yeah.
And sometimes I might say, hey, at this part, can you do something a little more blah, 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 but in general, no, I've never had anyone like way off the mark.
You're such a calm person,
Well,
it seems. Is that true on the inside, or are you pretty calm throughout, you think?
I try to be.
Yeah.
You know, I don't really see nothing gets accomplished by freaking out generally.
Right. Yeah.
Because that's the heat of the moment. Kind of, let's think about things. And
A lot of musicians, artists of different kind, that it comes from a dark place, to whether it's anxiety or a tough upbringing or like tumultuous relationships, whatever it might be. Do you think that that's true for you? Do you think that there's that it's rooted in? Conversely, I spoke to Jim West from Weird Al's band the other week, and he's no, not at all. It's just love of music. I feel like a totally zen person, and I don't have to struggle. I don't struggle with any of those things. I think it's probably more common for it to come from a darker place. But what about for you?
I honestly have to say, I mean, it hasn't been that dark. At least I haven't perceived it as being that dark. I think I have a wonderful mother. She's amazing. She'll be 92 this year. And I think it was just
Wow.
honestly just raised in a way that has made me who I am. And she was never one to be loud or freak out or anything like that. So I think I get a lot of that from her, I think. And just the way I was raised. My family is very into education and things like that.
Yeah, yeah. What do you have going on in the? Do you have any goals? Do you have? I'm not somebody that operates with goals. I just do what I have the tools to do in front of me and hope it does something. A lot of people do have goals. Where do you land on that?
The goal is to be able to continue doing these things that I do and making a living doing them.
Yeah.
Because I love my house. I don't need a big fancy mansion. We would like a pool one day, but it's all just, I don't know. I think I don't spend a lot of time thinking about what I don't have.
Yeah.
I really don't. And this goes back to my mom. I'm never bored. That's occurred to me recently. I wasn't allowed to use the word bored or boring growing up because she would find something for me to do and it would not be fun. So I
had a boss
truly
like that.
do not, I don't, and I'm never bored.
Yeah.
And life is good and it has its times, the vicissitudes, and it's not, but I feel blessed. So I just try to not take that for granted.
Yeah. Yeah, it's really easy to take some of that stuff for granted, especially when so many negative things are going on in the world, and that's all we get to hear about. I think when you get to be somebody that brings joy to people, whether it's through music or whatever, you really see that things aren't as bad. There's things that are terrible. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to get like super political here, but what I mean is that humans, people are a lot better than like the media makes. Like, we are not all against each other. People are out there that most people just want to live their life and have a good time.
Agree 100%. And that's what I see.
And they don't care about
when I'm traveling. And I don't. Yeah.
I think that allows some perspective that people that you get stuck in one place and they don't get to see the good, which is where I think music is one of the things that that's what makes us human. That's one of the things that defines us as human.
I think I'm very lucky my job is to try to help people forget their problems for 90 minutes at a time. And we were playing in Orlando and we walked out to get food and I'm walking back to the venue and I start seeing this line and this line is long. And I was like, oh, wait, they're coming to see us. And I think that's when it occurred to me is this is legitimately some people's all-time favorite band. And I can never phone in a show because people work hard for their money. And if they're going to lay down their money, especially for something that they love so much, I don't want to let them down.
Yeah. What have you got going on? I feel like so this probably won't come out till the beginning of next year at this point. So what's 2026 looking like for you?
2026, hopefully nice. Hopefully
Do you have
well.
any tours booked or anything like that right now?
No, I'm sure I'll still be doing stuff with Cracker. I'm doing some recording with Faye Webster. I don't know when that will be released. I don't know if it'll be out in 2026, but
nice.
I'm sure there'll still be some recording going on with her.
Do you prefer recording or playing live?
I think both.
Yeah. Are they really different for you?
Yeah. I'm lucky. I have a little bedroom studio and a lot of gear, so it's fun. I love recording. Absolutely love.
Are you a tinkerer? Do you like to fiddle with gear and tinker with gear?
It depends on the gear. I've gotten to the point where I like things kind of stock now, because if I need to replicate something, I want to know what I'm going to get. But yeah, there's a lot of amplifiers, a lot of amps, a lot of mics. I'm a geek. That's what it is, and I've somehow positioned myself that the geekiness is what brings in the money. the doing voices and recording music. It's crazy. So I feel blessed, and I don't take it for granted. So that's the goal, is to be able to maintain and do that.
I'm super lucky to sit here and have this conversation with you, and I really appreciate you being here, Bryan.
It's my pleasure.
Is there anything else that you feel like we like started to talk about, and then maybe I'm giving you an opportunity to tie up any loose ends if you think there are any.
There's so much now that I'm thinking about it. I'm overwhelmed. I think we've touched on enough for this.
That's awesome.
Maybe one day there'll be a part 2.
Hell yeah. Thanks for being here, man.
Oh, my pleasure.
That was
Thanks
great.
for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Bryan J. Howard. He was a real gem. Really enjoyed talking to him. I'm going to be doing all new material tonight at Birds, so check that out. And come on out tomorrow for science trivia at Blue Tavern. That's going to be a fun time. We're going to do a music round of songs about science, so come check that out. Before we wrap up, I just want to say, first of all, thank y'all for listening and sticking around, but I do want to say that Overeducated and Underemployed is completely independently made by me from start to finish. So if you enjoy these conversations and want to help keep the show sustainable, I've started a Patreon. There's some bonus content there, but mostly it's just a way to directly support the work. And you can find it linked in the description. Thanks so much for listening. Take us out of here, Sloan.